Megan, are we good to start soon? All right, we have 1 minute to go.
Yeah, I can let everyone in.
Yeah, I think that would be great. All right. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us for one of our final panels of the day, Gender and Sexuality in the Decolonial Gaze. I am Padmini Barua. My pronouns are they, them. I am one of the organizing team of the Decolonizing International Relations Conference, and it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce you to our two distinguished panelists for the day. I wanted to apologize straight up that we were unable to host Grace Banu today because of some unfortunate medical circumstances on her end. But right at the end of this call, I will be spotlighting her work and her activism a little bit. In the meanwhile, I wanted to briefly provide a short introduction for our panelists. And by short, I mean extremely short, because we will be hearing from them about their own work. So our first panelist is Storm Miguel Flores, who is an activist, a director, an editor, a performer, and has multiple hats that he wears in terms of carrying out activism in the gender and sexuality space. And our second panelist is Professor Karim Khubchandani from Tufts University, who's a writer and academic, also an activist, and just generally really fabulous. So I wanted to start off by speaking to the question of gender identity, right? I don't want to beat around the elephant in the room. So I was wondering if, starting with you, Storm Miguel, if you could tell us a little bit about your identity and how that influences your research activism and the kind of um, creative outputs that you're able to bring to the table.
Thank you so much, Padmini. I'm really excited to be here and to be here with Kareem. So my name is Storm Miguel Flores. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm transgender, transmasculine, queer. Have identified in so many ways throughout my life, and all of those, many of those identities have been political. So from a young age, when I came out as queer, I identified as a lesbian or a dyke, and those words were very political to me. Those identities were very political to me. And moving on, identifying as queer, identifying as butch, identifying as gender queer. And I feel like all of those identities are with me always. And now it always feels complicated to identify myself. I identify as a trans man, I identify as transmasculine, I identify as queer, and I identify as Chicanx or Chicane. So those are a lot of my identities, and those have always showed up in my art in some way, or showed up in how I produce. I have been a musician my whole life, and mostly in queer spaces and in trans spaces. And I'm also been a performance artist. My performance art has directly been around my transitioning back in my 30s. When I was transitioning, I was a performance artist and producer of a show called Trans as Fuck, which was a live trans sex show, like straight up, and there were no holds barred. And it was a very powerful thing for me as I was exploring my own gender identity and it was kind of, I started the show before I transitioned and continued it during my transition, and my performances had everything to do with the process of my physical and social transitioning. And as a filmmaker, it also plays in with how I see myself, how I identify as a filmmaker. What is my position as a filmmaker? I just did a film about lesbian youth in Albuquerque in the 70s and 80s, of which I was a part of, but also had to really look at my position as a man going into lesbian space to create this work. And I'm happy to talk about that more as we go, but just my identity and my gender identity has always been a part of my work, and in some ways just because they're all, it's who I am. So beyond all the other things that I am that exist within me. So I could talk about it for a long time, but I want to leave some space because this is introduction, and um, and I'll end with that.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say we're very interested to hear how your experience led to this creative energy. Professor Kupchandani, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Um, I use queer as a identifier in term for gender, sexuality, aesthetics as well. Um, I and that word has worked for me for a long time since I've sort of been out, because other markers like gay did not, it seemed unavailable to me when I came out, when I started going out to bars, when I started in spaces of LGBT activism, um, as a person of color, right, and as someone who didn't always conform to gender norms. Um, Gay seemed to always attach itself to whiteness in a way that was made it really inaccessible to me, and particularly where I was living when I moved to the U.S. when I was 17 years old. I was living in upstate New York, and it looked like one thing. It looked like preppy white boys, probably blonde, um, and um, and it was queer women of color who were making space for me, right? And so it just, queer made sense in a way, and attaching myself to lesbian and trans and gender nonconforming folks felt much more comfortable, right? I'm really going back to my origins of coming out and entering queer spaces. And I really appreciate, Storm Miguel, how you talked about inhabiting multiple identities over the course of your life. And in fact, as I do drag, and one of the identities that has made the most sense to me as I get older and as I age is auntie. Um, I think, when we start to think about age in relation to gender and sexuality, right, the older person is desexualized, or is not important to queer spaces anymore. We're behind. Our politics are bad and are old, right? And so auntie becomes this place for me to inhabit my gender as someone who is curmudgeonly and bitchy um, um, and old-fashioned, but in fabulous ways as well. But there are other aspects to my identity that I think are salient um, to me and to the work that I do is that I'm South Asian. My family is Sindhi, so originally from what is now Pakistan, displaced out of India and out of the subcontinent altogether. So I grew up in Ghana, in West Africa, and I I always do that, and I'm like, oh, I'm at an international relations conference, and you might actually know where Ghana is, which is very exciting to me. Um, but having grown up outside of the sort of the large South Asian diaspora in the U.S. or in the subcontinent, having this sort of unfixed position has, I think, given me. Uh, I have no attachments to place, or I have few attachments to place, and so fluidity and mobility and queerness again become really useful to me, not just in terms of gender and sexuality, but also in terms of my ethnic position in the world. And so the work that I do as a activist, I work with LGBT South Asian communities for political and social and creative organizing. I also am a researcher at Tufts University. I teach in women's and gender studies and theater, dance, and performance, and I write about nightlife and street theater and film and media. And then, and I just published a book called Ishtail, Accenting Gay Indian Nightlife. And then lastly, I'm a performer. I do drag, and I perform on campuses, in libraries, in museums, and of course at nightclubs as well.
Thank you so much. I think, and we'll definitely circle back to this issue that both of you have highlighted about how queerness as an identity is extraordinarily fluid. And I think I'm going to use that point to pivot around to my larger next question, which is around how gender as a concept has moved over time. And ever since the feminist movement started off, which was, almost a century ago, we've had several different conceptions of what gender is. So I want to ask you about this definition of gender and how you think coloniality has been an influence. Professor Krupchandani, could we start with you, given that as we were discussing on our call yesterday, there's a significant part of your new work focuses around the question of colonization and gender.
Sure, yeah. So thanks for that. So I'm working on a new book called Decolonize Drag, and specifically thinking about how has this performance practice that we call drag been settled by white notions of gender, professionalism, aesthetics, of sort of rich aesthetics in which it's made unavailable to most folks, or how is whiteness? So when you're a drag queen, you're supposed to paint your nose more narrowly in order to fit the beautiful aesthetics of femininity, red-coated white femininity. You're supposed to wear a gown, or you're supposed to wear a cocktail dress, again, performing a particular kind of class position. But what I think is most, and we also see the way that drag has been co-opted by the RuPaul industrial complex, such that it is now a sort of capitalist mode of performing gay queer identities. But what concerns me most is that drag has been forced into performing gender binaries. And I think that's sort of, so if you can only be a drag king or a drag queen, or that's the expectation, right? And drag kings are even made invisible by the RuPaul industrial complex. But we in this expectation that we perform a binary, I understand that binary of gender as being a particularly European and Western colonial construct. Because and I think about this thinking through other folks' work, that the process of colonization under racial capitalism has used fluidity in other cultural contexts as a reason to say, these folks are not civilized enough. They are not they haven't properly differentiated male and female, masculine and feminine, and we need to bring our civilizing missions here. So some examples of this are when the British arrived in South Asia, and they saw that men wore the same unstitched garments that women wear, so what we call the sari now, that men wore the exact same wrapped cloth that was draped over their bare chest. They were like, oh, this is too feminine and graceful. One, men and women, or what they read as men and women, were wearing the same thing, but they also used words like graceful, these graceful drapes were unbecoming of men. And that's because their understandings of clothing were already binarized. So women wore skirts, men wore pants. And so when they saw this, that was one example. That's one example of where they were thinking, oh, they haven't properly differentiated gender. This is something we need to enforce, right, through our civilizing missions. Other ways that they tried to enforce their understandings of gender distinctions was in the form of racial science. So when Black bodies were measured, Black female bodies were measured by the sort of specious bad science as a way of saying, oh, these female bodies are too much like Black male bodies. And so they would measure Black women's labias and say, oh, they're much longer than and larger than white women's labias. And therefore, these Black bodies are not properly civilized. They haven't properly separated into the gender binaries. So with that, and of course, the folks who've gone back and looked at these records show that these scientists were making things up, right? But the understanding that the gender binary wasn't happening in Black people's bodies or in brown people's style or clothing or culture became reasons for understanding them as uncivilized. So jump forward to 300 years, we have these. When we start thinking about drag, when we see that the enforcement of the gender binary happens in drag, you shouldn't be hairy if you're performing feminine drag. Your breasts, your large breasts shouldn't show if you're performing masculine drag. Is precisely this colonial logic that that thinks that there is that male bodies and female bodies, masculine performance and feminine performance are completely different from each other. Just a couple of quick examples, or one more quick example in the context of European settlement in the U.S. Any male Native people who were acting quote unquote effeminate were particularly and actively disciplined in the schools that that they were forced into in the boarding schools that they were forced into. So it's not just the native knowledges that were being eradicated upon settlement, but particular forms of gender enactment. Even the cutting of long hair was this way of disciplining indigenous male-bodied people into binary masculinity. So if we take this long process of enforcing the binary, we see how the binary is a colonial construct. And the last thing I'll say is masculinity and femininity exist across cultures, but they aren't the only forms of gender, right? Of doing gender,
Hello?
but it's that eradication
Hello?
of other possibilities.
I'm gonna commit suicide. Please. Ugh.
Okay. I think we have a situation.
Shut the fuck.
Apologies about that.
Are we okay to keep going?
Delia?
My understanding is that there's been some Zoom bombs, and hopefully that was all that was.
Yes, very concerning.
I think we're good to continue.
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay.
Okay. If I can ask folks to just take a breath. Okay. So the
I'm so sorry.
no, don't apologize.
Yeah, and I feel like along with the breath, let's
Call it
just
two genders. Don't let you go back to your country.
go.
You're ready for back some
There we
pain,
go.
my nigga.
You're
You're either a boy or a girl, you dumbasses.
Delia, please.
Dude, it's not that hard. You
Delia,
social rejects. You'll never be nothing in life. Kill yourself.
I think there's a way to mute all participants.
You fucking stupid tranny.
All right, everybody.
Fucking tranny bitches. Pick a fucking gender, you fucking queers.
Okay, I just muted all participants. Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay. I just muted everybody and did not give them the option to unmute themselves. I don't know if we should let anybody else into this meeting right now.
I don't think so.
So
I would
we're just-
actually be okay if we close the chat right now, please. If anyone has questions.
Close the chat. Oh, okay. Oh, no, no.
Right. Just don't read the chat until we shut it down. We're so sorry about this.
Yeah.
Delia, I think you might have to go into your Zoom settings and then just.
To my Zoom settings? Okay.
I think so. I don't know if there's a way to do it from here.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure it out, but
I'm extremely sorry about that.
Okay, Delia, I think you're gonna have to go to your so go to zoom.us and then log into your account.
I have to go in through the back. Okay.
All right. Thank you for bearing with us as we figure this out, everyone. All right, so then go to your settings. And then let's see. All right, so then just turn chat off. Just turn it off. And that should fix the problem.
I don't know if that shuts chat off.
Yeah, please shut the chat off. Please lock the room. And please remove. I'm going to text you a list of the names. Please remove them from the room.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll do that.
Could someone try chatting to see if it works? Because I just turned it off on my end.
I just
Yeah, it's still working.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the only way I know how to do it. But now that we're in the meeting, I don't know if that's.
I don't think we can do it now, but you know what we'll do is I would recommend everyone that you hide your chat. And second of all, we're not going to let anyone else in the meeting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can move forward because we're much better than them.
No place for hate here.
Truly.
I think I would like to take a moment, if everyone's okay with that.
Yes, please.
I think that is a live example of how much hate there still exists, even when we're trying to have conversations around this issue. And I'm extremely sorry that we all had to listen to that. Delia, can we unmute the panelists, please?
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing.
I'm good to keep going.
So am I. Thank you. And I'm sorry this is happening, this for everybody here. And, here we all are together. I feel like looking around, like these are the folks that are doing the work. These are the folks that, this is our community, right? We have people here who are really strong in supporting and together in a way that I think people who are doing these kinds of assaults are not. They're random. They're random people. People tweet, this thing's going on, Zoom bomb them, and then everybody jumps in. These people are just so fragmented and they're not in any way connected, but through these assaults. And so it really is, it's a very small amount of folks doing these kinds of things, but they're also just really loud and really, they cause a lot of harm. And so I think it's just important to remember like who our people are, where we are, how even though we're not in the room together, we are more together than the folks that would come in and try to disrupt.
Thank you. I think the biggest resistance act we have at the moment is to continue with the agenda of this particular panel. And I would like to perhaps request Professor Khubchandani to finish that thought that you were on about the spectrum.
Yeah, thanks. So just in our everyday life and in drag, as I'm writing, the ways that the binary is enforced, when we tell women that they have to tweeze their facial hair, when my own little nieces are wondering why I wear nail polish, right? Just all the ways that the gender binary is enforced, I think, are things that we have to check, but they are legacies of colonial practice. As our moments of Zoom bombing, right? When they say pick a gender, right? That anxiety is an old one, and it comes from those it comes from these colonial encounters when European settlers and colonizers encountered others who didn't practice gender and embodiment the way they did, and created and institutionalized those anxieties that continue till today about the binary. I'll pass it on to Storm and Gail to say more.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
I think it's safe to say that there is not a nuanced understanding of this issue. And I would really like to hear from you, Storm Miguel, the ways in which you've seen decoloniality being played out, as well as the ways in which colonization continues to entrench the discussion even today.
Sure. Well, I think that everything that Professor Kuchandani said was really just spot on, really solid. I really appreciate all the ways you broke it down and all the ways that you just gave these very solid examples of the things that built that are at the foundation of where we are with gender now. And then I think I can speak to the ways that it shows up in just daily life. I think that thinking about family, I really loved it. You were talking about being an auntie. I think that one of the things we do in queer and trans communities is we create family. We create chosen family. We create titles, like respectful titles for our elders and for our youth, right? So I have been named Tio by many young folks, and so they're my sobrinas, sobrines, sobrinos, however they identify, right? And that is healing. We work to heal those wrongs. The ways it's played out, I think, in my own family, thinking about how what it has healed for me. My own brother, when he adopted his son, the family didn't talk about me. I was erased. I've never been erased in my family, really, as a queer or as a trans person. I know I've been maybe not talked about as much, but fully erased from this child's life, from this child's knowledge, or not erased, but just not brought in. So I was erased from their lives. I was erased from their conversation when this young person, family member, was brought in. And I remember having a conversation with my brother about it, saying, "Hey, I would love to," because they never talked to me about him. They never said, "Hey, let's meet your Uncle Storm." And so I told my brother, I would love to be considered his uncle. And it was right around the time I was transitioning. I started my physical transition, and everybody in the family knew. I came out to everybody, told them how I wanted to regard me and let them know what was going on in my life. And he said, "No, that's asking too much. It's going to confuse him, and it's not all about you." And so this is what we get told a lot. It's not all about you, as soon as we try to assert ourselves, assert our gender, especially in families. And so I didn't get to be an uncle to my nephew. And to this day, he doesn't call me uncle, but we're actually very close, but he doesn't call me uncle because he was never taught to call me uncle. I had to, my other nephew, who's really a wonderful ally, is the first one that told him, "Hi, come give your Uncle Storm a hug," So I think about these ways that it plays out. These are the very personal ways that these pains, and my own, my brother is the most conservative person in my family, in my immediate family. And so, these ways that the colonialism always goes right. That's what the right is about, trying to really hold on to these just arcane ideas of how people should be and how we should express ourselves and who gets to be in power, of course. So, I've watched him do that assimilation. I've watched him, basically try to completely erase the brownness from him. And and unconsciously, right, we don't realize that our our ethnicity or our race or our roots are intertwined with our concept of gender. We don't understand that, because we're not taught about colonization. We're not taught about that in high school. We're not taught about that in college, unless we go out of our way to try to, I say we, I didn't go to college, but unless people go out of their way to want to learn these things, that's not being taught. And so it's really, I think about the election right now. I think about all the ways that we see brown, for me, it's just always how are Latina people, I kind of differentiate Latina and Hispanic. people who vote for who are conservative voters, I just kind of, my own tongue-in-cheek way of kind of self-soothing is, oh, that's what Hispanic means in my life. You know, if you're Latina, Chicana, you know where you come from, you know what your roots are, then you claim that. Otherwise, it's just this kind of thing that's been put on people that is embraced as like Hispanic, and it's this kind of, it's this attachment to Europe, Hispanic. And so I think about, you know, we ask ourselves, why are all these brown people voting, you know, for Trump, for example? And there's just this holding on to and trying to assimilate that continues to happen. And it's just such a disservice to ourselves, to our families, to the people who are trying to be here and live um, and who live every day in fear of being caged, and those who are. And sorry, I'm just trying to center as I talk. But it is all so interconnected. It's also interconnected where we put our energies and where we're putting our faith. And for the people that are putting their faith in white supremacy, then you know that they're going to be more attached to all of the constructs that white supremacy has built, including gender, of course, and people think that they're going to get something from that, and some do. You know, definitely. As a brown person, I have my privileges, and as a light-skinned person, I have my privileges, and a lot of people choose to lean into that.
Thank you.
That's
I
all I
think
have for
that
now.
no, thank you so much. And again, I want to say that if anybody, and I'm extending this to the members of the DIR team who are on this call as well, feels like they need a minute, please feel free to switch off, drink a glass of water, take any steps you do need to take to center ourselves, I think. On the last point that Stormy Gale raised, Professor Kuchandani, I was wondering if you had thoughts on this intersectionality of identities. As you've said, you occupy a spectrum across the identity. You occupy many spaces across the identity spectrum. And I was curious, how do you think this intersectionality, which has become such a buzzword now, right, over the past couple of decades, how do you think it can be meaningfully realized in the context of decolonization if we're thinking about a lived transformation of social identity? Can you unmute Professor Kupchandani, please, Delia?
I'll make sure to leave my mic on after this. It's just I have it to mute myself again. So I think that we aren't necessarily living. I'm not living as South Asian and queer separately, right? We have to understand that, you know, I'm not differentiating those unless I'm in like a super white queer space and I'm like, oh, I'm the only South Asian here, then it comes to bear very evidently, or vice versa, right? I mean, at some like family function and I'm the only queer around, and I'm like, oh, I feel I feel my identity. But otherwise, they're always informing each other, and they're making each other. So sometimes intersectionality isn't always the best way to name that condition, right? So the theory of intersectionality is a way of understanding oppressions as it comes from Kimberly Crenshaw, right? That and she comes at it as a legal theorist, right? And so she's thinking like the way that the law understands oppression is that someone can be oppressed for being a woman and someone can be oppressed for being Black, right? And then there's some times where those things meet, right? And we don't actually know how to deal with that that intersection, right? But Black women aren't moving through the world understanding themselves, I am Black and I'm a, right? They're moving through the world as Black women, right? And so theorists have offered us the word misogynoir as a way of naming the specific kind of violence that Black women experience, because it isn't just one, and it isn't 1+1, right? It's actually more complex and works in different ways. So one is that intersectionality isn't always the right thing to name oneself, and that our identities look different or function differently as when we think about our real subjectivity and how we experience the world. That's one. The other thing I think about is what are different ways to be queer that don't always read as queer, right? How have communities of color and post-colonial societies offered us other ways of being queer that don't look like they do in the gay nightclub, which is the space I write about, right? So
Mhm.
I when you go to the club, you're supposed to wear your best clothes, you're supposed to serve a look, and you're supposed to, and it's all supposed to be expensive, and you're supposed to be able to afford the most expensive liquor in the space. But and that's enforced in the nightclubs I write about in Bangalore by bouncers, right? Who are saying you don't live up to the capitalist aesthetic of the space, you can't get in, right? But and so in my book, I'm thinking about, well, what's the way to practice your Indianness in these bars that are asking you to perform a particular kind of whiteness. And so, I try to capture these small moments in which people are refusing the 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 proper way to be gay in that unmarked white way, right? And one of those ways is going to the club and getting to the middle of the dance floor and then taking off your shoes and dancing, right? You're absolutely not supposed to do that. But if you're going to do the full like Bollywood jumping steps, you want to be as comfortable as possible and you want to be in your bare feet, right? And so just little moments like that. Or another thing I write about is going up to the DJ and saying, change the music, put on Indian music, right? Because the DJs want to play Goa trance, which is like the whitest form of sound in Indian nightclubs. But by just bugging, you're not supposed to bother the DJ. The DJ is the artist of the night, right? Or that's what we've been made to think, right? And that's what global white gay cultures have taught us to think, is that the DJ is the maestro of the space. So what is this other way of like shifting the feeling in the space, shifting how you belong in the space? And so so sometimes it doesn't necessarily look like, we wouldn't call that decolonization in the most obvious sense, right? But it is a practice of identity that refuses the unmarked norm that has been enforced upon us. We might think about also the ways that a lot of queer South Asian relationships are actually friendships. They're lovers, but everybody understands them as friends. And they're not looking to come out and tell everybody, I'm gay and I'm proud and please recognize my love. They're very happy moving through the world as friends. Um, and this folks in South Asia and elsewhere have been practicing this kind of love. And it's only sort of recent liberal discourse I think there was a Guardian article that circulated really widely recently that was like, friendship platonic love should take precedence over romantic love, right? And suddenly people are coming into this kind of named language over it. That's been going on for so long in anywhere from Sufi poetry to current queer India. So I think these other ways of being queer are also important that don't necessarily fall into intersectional, like these two identities meet and give us something else, but rather they just sort of remove themselves from the logic of white visibility in interesting ways. I hope that made sense.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's been a hot second since I've heard the phrase Goa trance. So that really does take me back to my own days as a party bopper in Bangalore. Storm Miguel, I wanted to frame this question for you in context of the work you did for The Whistle. For the uninitiated, Storm Miguel has directed and made and produced this very thought-provoking documentary about the I mean, loosely, it's about the experience of identifying as lesbian in New Mexico, I believe. And I'm hoping to hear more about that work from you and how this question of quote unquote intersectionality plays in your experience as the director and in the stories you were telling.
You need to unmute.
Oh, please unmute, Star Miguel, Delia.
Sorry, I keep muting myself because my dog is occasionally going into barking fits. So, I
They're most
apologize for having to keep do
welcome.
that.
They're most welcome. I think we could all use a dog right now.
Yes. So, I would love to talk about The Whistle, but I'd also love to talk a bit about the show that I did, Trans as Fuck, because there's two very different specific situations. The Whistle is me going into lesbian community as a trans person and documenting this particular time and place. And the first one, and the other one is about me claiming trans space and in a way that wasn't 100% binary, and in a way that wasn't necessarily acceptable in trans space, because there was this idea of, if you transition, you're transitioning, you're still within that binary. And there's a whole narrative that we're told about how you feel about your body and how you should feel about your body as a whole. So I'll talk a little bit about The Whistle, but I'd definitely love to get back to talking about Trans as Fuck as well. And with The Whistle, the intersection. So, I'm a trans man in the world. I'm generally seen as a man, a brown man, maybe. I don't always know how people see me as far as my ethnicity and roots and race. And so I was going back to Albuquerque to film this story about lesbians who were out as youth in the 70s and 80s in Albuquerque, and who had a very vibrant community and had codes and ways to keep themselves and each other safe. And one of those codes was a whistle. And I say they, but I was also a part of that world. And so it was about telling my story, but I didn't want to necessarily center myself. And interestingly enough, I do end up in the documentary and doing some narration in the documentary because it turned out that was a part of the story. And in order to meet folks that I even knew back then, I had to go and really open up and let people know I was trans, and even dead name myself, as we call it, when we use like our government name or the name that we were assigned when we were born. And most trans people want nothing to do with their dead names, and it's really harmful, painful, insulting to use that with us. And so I had to do that with myself in order to remind people who I was, because there were a lot of people who I wanted to talk with who hadn't seen me in years and knew me one way. And so I had to go back and say, hi, my name is, Storm. We knew each other in high school. I went by this. I'm transgender. This is why I go by Storm Miguel now. And I'm interested in talking with you about this documentary that I want to do. And there was this building, and that was a part of building of trust. So thinking about, there are ways that intersectionality, what to me means just being within that space and being with other people who are like you. And there's, like you said, Dr. Gupchandani, that there's no need to do that when you're in that space. But when you are not in that space, there is this need to then kind of identify yourself and compartmentalize yourself. And in this case, it was done to help build trust among a community that I wanted to connect with and who I was going to ask to tell their story. So I, in this case, was kind of in the position of power. I was in the position of power because I'm making this movie. I'm getting the funding for this movie. I'm going to create the narrative for this movie and what's going to be seen out there. So because I'm in this position of power, it felt important for me to compartmentalize myself to start to build that trust with folks. Because there was, on Facebook, I put out a little teaser about, this is what I'm doing, that we're looking for people to talk to us. And people were posting like, this guy's making a movie about us. And, I had to go like, hi, I'm that guy. And here's why I'm interested. And here's, I was a part of that. And it was just a continuous reintroducing myself and outing myself as trans, which I'm pretty out as trans anyway, but it's not the first thing I tell people about myself. And so in the making of that film, it was very important, again, just to see what my position, to really understand my position in that process. And it was very welcome. People were really, really wonderful, really open with their stories. Not everybody wanted to talk to me until later on. They started to see how it was starting to look and got excited about it. But part of the kind of decolonial process of making film and making documentary film, even it was important for me to kind of institute that in this, or just like kind of weave it into the process. So one of the things to me that's important is to let people tell their own stories and their own narratives. And documentary filmmakers will, or at least traditionally, will say that is the wrong way. You are an objective person who's going into this community and you're observing and you're getting the answers, you're asking questions, and then you are coming back, and as this, this objective person, you're creating what you see. And if you go in and let them decide what they want to tell, well, then it's not objective. Well, that's just like ridiculous, because anybody who goes into a community to learn about that community is going in with their own filters and their own experiences and their own privileges and their own ideas of what that community is. There's no way that's not going to show up in the film. And so even in this film where I was a part of that community, it was really important for me to, when I talk to folks, and let them know, look, don't edit yourself right now. We'll do that later, and you're going to have a say in that. So I want you to just tell me everything you're thinking. Don't hold back. And I promise you, you are going to have a say. And this isn't reality TV. This is going to be your story. And so people were telling their stories, and you never know what people are going to be comfortable with later. So it's a little like you get excited about a story, but you can't I have to hold on to it, kind of lightly. So I sent everybody a couple of times, where we were with the film. I'd send them a first like rough cut and say, this is where the story's going. This is where your story's going. How do you feel about it? Do you feel like it accurately represents you? Is there anything that you don't feel good about? And so it's my job then to listen and say, this thing that I said isn't really, I didn't really mean to say that, or it came out wrong, or I don't feel comfortable with that being out there forever. And for me to really listen to that. And so that is a part of my process, because I don't want anybody to see a film, especially think about like, queer people, lesbians, Latina people. We have, been, people of color in general, BIPOC people, stories have been told about us and narrations have been put out there about us, and we've had no say in how that is. In overall, like the media in general, it's white people telling our stories. And so it was very important for me, for everybody to see their story for the first time and not be surprised, only be pleasantly surprised with, the graphics that I threw in and the music that I threw in and the things that end up making it a film, but not to ever be surprised about how they show up. And so to me, that's a big part of the kind of decolonizing process in filmmaking. And because it all intersects, it has everything to do with gender, just from the start. When I started making it, like I had to really be thinking about my position and how I stepped into this community and how I built trust. And so there's that piece there. And I don't want to take up all the time talking about that. And I know I said I wanted to talk about trans as fuck, but can I try keep talking, or do you want to move on?
Absolutely. I think this sheds a lot of light on how, as members of the community, as well as people who are trying to make a difference, so to speak, it's important that we're also contemplating on decolonizing process in our own lives. But I do wanted to ask you back about trans as fuck, and maybe pose it in context of how is performance as resistance a part of your life, and what does trans as fuck mean in that context?
Thank you. Yes. So Trans as Fuck, it was, like I said, it was a live trans sex show, which the first time we did it, it was truly just chaotic and wonderful. Like we just invited all our friends who were interested and comfortable and excited about going on stage and doing something. And we were just like, whatever you want, bring it. So the first time it was just like pure, it was just pure anarchy. And there was a lot of different kinds of performances. There was suturing, there was fisting on stage, ejaculating on stage, and it was all in the context of people celebrating their bodies and their gender. And when I performed at that one, I performed, and then the next one I performed at I did a piece. It was called, gosh, I already forgot what it was called. That's so funny. My First Year on T. That's what it was called. So I did a piece called My First Year on T, where I went on stage without my shirt on. I hadn't had top surgery yet, and I played two songs that I wrote my first year on testosterone, just about relationships and just kind of all of the internal turmoil I was going through with my hormones going kind of nuts. And I also was having to deal with my voice changing. So I loved my singing voice before I transitioned. And so many trans guys, that's not necessarily the story, but I loved my voice. And so to let that go, I had to grieve it. And I also had to kind of work through it. And I sang through that whole time. And even though my voice was cracking, and I call it the Peter Brady experiment, which is it's based on an episode of the show called The Brady Bunch. That's about the singing family and the voice changes, and they end up using it to their advantage. And so while I was singing those songs, my partner pierced a corset into my back, a really pretty, beautiful red corset. And so there's all these things going on. A corset is generally considered a very feminine thing. And the needles were representative of the testosterone, the shots. And my body would respond every time I got a needle. Every time I got a shot, my body would respond to that, right? So as I'm singing, my voice would crack because the piercing would happen. And so it was just this whole performance of embracing the discomfort and excitement of that transition, and embracing all the parts of myself that I wasn't supposed to be embracing. I wasn't supposed to be embracing my chest. I wasn't supposed to be embracing this like pretty corset in my back. You know, I did another piece in Trans as Fuck where I fisted myself. I'm not supposed to be embracing my genitalia as a trans person pre-op, you know, and for me, I never wanted to have that surgery because I love that part of my body, you know, and I have a tattoo. It says pussy boy. Like there's that at the time it felt scary because there was this narrative of like, we're not supposed to be comfortable with our bodies. We're not supposed to be connected to our bodies. And we're not supposed to show our bodies and express our bodies and show ourselves sexually and in ways that might remind people of our assigned gender at birth. And so to me, that felt very healing, and it was definitely felt revolutionary for us all to be on stage, embracing our bodies exactly where they were. And maybe some of us changed our bodies later, and that was okay too. But to really just to be able to do that and understand that not everybody can do that, and that's totally fine. But just showing people that want to, or even that can't or don't want to, that this is another way. This is another way to celebrate our gender and our transness.
And
Thank you. I think I
can I
got goosebumps.
can I add to that?
Yes, of course. I was going to come to you and speak to that.
I mean, I think there's something really important about understanding performance as I think the word performance turns people off because it suggests fakeness, right? It suggests that what happens on stage is not real life, right? But in fact, what I think you're doing, Storm Miguel, is offering instruction and pedagogy. Like when you put things on stage, there are people there watching and they're learning. They're learning what gender can look like. They're learning what sex can look like. They're learning that sex doesn't always have to look like penetration, right? Or it can be penetration with a needle or with a hand and not with objects that resemble the body already, right? And I think that and then you teach yourself things too, right? You're teaching yourself how to sing in different ways by having your partner pierce your body. And so you learn more things about yourself. And I'm saying all this because this is what happened with, I started doing drag reluctantly. I was organizing a show and I needed a South Asian drag artist and I couldn't find one in Chicago when I moved there. So I just did it for the first time. And as I kept doing it, I learned a lot about my body, about my history, about all these memories of how I was and wasn't allowed to dance as a child came back, right? And so you're teaching others how to move, how to dress, how to be beautiful, how to have sex, but you also learn so much in yourself, right? By doing it, right? Instead of just thinking, because I mean, we sort of another legacy of colonialism is the Cartesian mind-body split, right? That the mind and the body are different things. But in fact, the learning that happens and the awareness that happens, the cognitive awareness that happens by doing, by performance, I think is actually really instructive both to those who are doing it and those who are watching and witnessing. And I think that's really a valuable gift you're giving people, Storm Miguel, is putting yourself on stage and trying new things and experimenting with your body. It becomes a gift and it becomes a transactional gift, right? Other people want to get on stage themselves the next time, or want to learn more, or go home and try something for themselves. And I think that that's all just really necessary and beautiful.
Thank you. I love that. I love this idea of like we're teaching ourselves and teaching each other how to be, just how to be, how to celebrate our lives, how to celebrate ourselves and our bodies. I don't do that performance anymore. My body has changed significantly. My ability has changed. I have limited mobility, and also just a different relationship to my body, and have moved my art like my artistry in a direction I never thought I would. Film, like, it's very interesting that my life has started out in this. I don't know if you're familiar with the North Node and South Node in in astrology. The South Node is kind of where you're coming from. Karmically, and the North Node is where you're going and where you're headed or what you're trying to create. And so for me, it was about coming from this place of Leo, like I'm gonna put myself out there and I'm always performing, and that was a great way of expressing myself. And it's become, now I'm like really obsessed with video editing and just being behind the scenes and moving toward that Aquarius of like what is happening outside of me, and I'm interested in expressing learning about that and finding ways to express my own artistic desires and impulses toward having other people's stories be told, or having things kind of happen outside of my own body and my own physical body, even though it is of course my physical body that's doing that work.
I think that's an extremely beautiful thought. I believe that within the movement, there's often not enough attention paid to how the body is situated. And I found that one of the more visible spaces for this, of course, and I'm only speaking to the Indian experience because that's where I'm from, has always been Pride for me, where there's multiple different ways in which people use their bodies just to present and celebrate this whole concept of identity. Professor Kupchandani, how would you say performance has equated resistance in your specific context?
So since you brought up Pride, that's the first thing that's where my mind is. But when I was attending Pride in India, the couple of things one, Pride was a march, not a parade. So everybody who was at the march was in it as well. And I think that again, to come back to this question of performance, and when you participate as opposed to just spectate, your body does go through a transformation, right? You are like, oh, I'm part of this body of people, and there's multiplicity there. There are hijras and kotis, which are trans-feminine, specifically South Asian trans-feminine identities. There are hijras and kotis, there are trans men, there are lesbians, there are families, there are butch folks, there are effeminate men, everybody's here, right? So in that process of being together, you suddenly realize, oh, I'm much more, who I am is actually extends outwards into a much larger body of people, right? And so that's one transformation I witnessed for myself and others. The other is, at these marches, they distribute masks because a lot of people are concerned with privacy. Mm-hmm. By the end of the march, you see very few masks on. The people are holding them in their hand, they've thrown them, but there is, again, a transformation that happens as people are like, oh, this is actually great, right? I didn't realize that this is what this was going to be, and there are other people who look like me or who are being themselves on their own terms, and why can't I do that? And so again, I think participating creates this transformation, allows for presence. And then there's the other level of things, which is public visibility. And again, in India specifically, in the 2013 ruling that that recriminalized sodomy in India, the judge's claim was that these LGBT people are a minuscule
Minuscule
minority.
minority. Mm-hmm.
So in fact, visibility becomes important, right? More people showing up at these marches, and more marches showing up across the nation, become actual evidence of people's lives, right? And that their bodies exist. And that becomes important to the state recognition. It sucks that you have to come out into visibility in order for the state to think that law should be made to protect you, right? That this minuscule minority should not be protected. It should be actually the role of the state to protect the most vulnerable in their smallest numbers. But that's not the logic that was working. So coming together in numbers actually makes a difference. I'm not sure, I've forgotten what your question was, so maybe I should stop my answer there.
Oh, it was just speaking to art as resistance in your specific context.
So I'll add one last thing, is that the artistry with which people present their bodies in these spaces. There's an excellent essay by Brian Horton in the most recent issue of South Asia Journal about fashion and fabulation at Mumbai Pride, and specifically thinking about how does the word fabulous has its root. Fabulous and fabulation has its root in fables, right? Storytelling. But how does being fabulous become a way of telling a story and making a world, especially for those who the world doesn't want to accommodate, right? How can being fabulous, even for a day at Pride, become this way of having a world for yourself? When society, politics, government, law doesn't want you to belong in the world, right? And so creativity, I think, it's a really great example of how creativity in the everyday is actually is an act of resistance to belong in a world that doesn't want you to exist.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that brings me to my last question for this panel. And after that, since we are not taking questions from anyone, I wanted to just check in if you have questions for each other. I think that might be a very fulfilling discussion. But the last thing I want to ask is a slightly sobering thought, as evidenced by today's unacceptable happenings. I think it goes to show that there's still so much hate for a community that's not harming anyone, for choices that are not hurting people. And there's no logical sense to this idea of erasure, or this idea of sort of forcing people to conform to this binary identity just because some people are scared of this. So in the face of this particular pushback, and I want to hear from you, Storm Miguel, if you would like to go first on this. What is the response in the face of this kind of oppression that continues to this day? I mean, and I'm not just asking this as a moderator. Honestly speaking, I think this is as somebody who is a huge admirer of the work that you do, of the work that Professor Kupchandani does, of the work that Grace does, which I think in India is a remarkable context, given that she's a Dalit transgender activist, which is the to go back to Kimberly Crenshaw, the kind of intersectional oppression that identity entails is just not imaginable. But so just as somebody who's also trying to navigate their way in this world, I'm genuinely asking this both as a moderator and as somebody who's looking for some advice and maybe mentorship.
Thank you. So I feel like everything Professor Kupchandani was just saying is a big part of that. That the pushback, and we've been, as queers and trans people, we have been pushing back against these standards of what is normal, what is acceptable, what is beautiful, our whole, for as long as we've existed, really, you know, especially against colonialism, you know. So all of these ways that we celebrate ourselves and each other, right? We get like, one of the people that I interviewed in the Whistle, outside of the film, we were talking, and she was saying, you know, what was so cool about being able to be out as a young dyke, and the reason we were able to be out was because we had each other, not out to like the world, but out to ourselves and each other. That we, because we had that much, that we were able to be out to ourselves and each other as teenagers, and because we were intermingling and we were dating and we were hanging out and had places to go, that like we got to look in the mirror and say, damn, I look cute today, or I look hot today. And I think that that is not a common thing for a lot of young people, period, but especially young people who are told that they're not going to make their way in this world because of who they are, that they have no place in this world because of who they are. And so I do feel like there's this way that we get to look in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. And not always, right? Not always, but that we do things. We do things to help that process. And that's a part of our culture. That's a part of queer culture, is that we accentuate and we adorn ourselves, and we wear clothes that make us feel cute, and we compliment ourselves publicly. Damn, I look good today. You know, I'm going to compliment myself publicly by posting a selfie online of how good I look today. And these are some of the ways that we are resilient, and um, that we push back against that, you know. And it is pushback, it's a response, it is a response, to be real, but it's more than that. It's us really owning our expression, and it's owning our our look, and it's owning our inner and outer beauty. And we do that really well in our community. We really, I feel like we really uplift each other in that way.
Mhm.
And so when these things are told to us, that, you know, when these insults are hurled at us, they can be very painful. But when there's power in numbers, and when we have those connections to community, that we're a lot stronger. I know that sounds very cliche, but I think about like how those words might have hurt me if I didn't have community, and if I didn't feel confident in who I am in the world. And if I didn't feel confident in who all of you are out in the world, you know, I just feel like that there's these ways that we get to have that, and that it's not performance. It's not just performance, you know, it's really an expression and a celebration, and a really owning our power in that way. So that's a
Mhm.
piece of it for me. That's a big piece of it.
Thank you. Professor Kupchandani, I actually had, uh, I wanted to ask you two questions. One, of course, is sort of responding to this beautiful idea of the sense of self that Stormy Yale has just raised. And I, as a South Asian academic, and you know, me being a South Asian academic aspirant, I feel like we do need to talk about caste in context of queer identity and in context of decolonization. And I was really sad that we couldn't have like a larger conversation around that. I was wondering if you would like to comment to that in context of this idea of resistance and identity.
Sure, yeah. So I'm gonna sort of think off of your previous question to Storm Miguel and then get to this. But I think the work that we have to do is we have to take stock of all the things we've made invisible, but that are actually functioning in our lives, right? So how is the gender binary constantly enforced, right? Constantly. And what is that in service of? So from how clothes are arranged at a shopping store, to gender reveal parties, to all of these things, right? There's so many ways that we are reproducing a norm, and we're just not saying that that's what we're doing, but we're doing it, right? So really taking stock. So whiteness goes unmarked, the gender binary goes unmarked, and we have to work really hard to do that. And then we have to think about how caste goes unmarked. So when we ask, when I started going to India for research, people would ask, what is your good name, right? And they're asking for your full name because they want to know your last name because they want to identify your caste. Then they'll ask, where are you basically from, right? And I'll say, I would give the answer, I'm born in Gibraltar, I grew up in Ghana. They're like, no, but where are you basically from?
Yeah.
Right? Give me the place so I can place you based on my knowledge of how class and caste and language work in the subcontinent, so that I can decide whether I like you or not, or trust you or not, or think you are dignified enough right? So, but all of these things are coded and unmarked. And it's that work we have to do to start seeing the things that go unmarked. A lot of the time, or even simple things like when we share, when you're out with friends and you have a drink of their water, but you don't touch the bottle to your lips, right?
That's right.
The rationalization we give is, oh, it's for hygiene, but its history is in fact, I'm not supposed to touch a Dalit person, and I'm not supposed to have any contact with them, right? And so the legacies of casteism, and legacies ongoing, right? But just this long practice of caste hierarchy and caste apartheid produce these daily practices in our homes, in our lives, in our friendships, in how we get to know new people, and we don't interrogate them. And so our investment in the subcontinent, and in India specifically, in enforcing gender binaries there, is also because we're interested in heteronormativity. And we're interested in heteronormativity because we want to reproduce dominant caste lineages, right? So even, again, another thing that goes unmarked is like the heteronorm. But the state's deep investment in that is because they want to extend Brahminical supremacy. So these are all the ways that caste is functioning, but it functions as invisible. And then, of course, there's so one of the work we have to do is recognize all the things that are made invisible. The other thing is to really honor, celebrate, stage, and make public the work that minoritarian folks are doing, that Indigenous folks are doing, that Dalit and Adivasi activists are doing, like Grace Banu, right? Whose identity is inconceivable in India, isn't thought of as central to the state. Why is she not the keynote speaker for all the queer conferences going on? Right? How can we stage and uplift those voices as core knowledge that all of us should have, as opposed to something she's doing just for her community, right? Why is she not the norm, and why is Brahminical supremacy the norm? Why is what she does not the unmarked thing that we're all doing, and right? So interrogating what is unmarked and really lifting up what is minoritarian, I think, are two things that we can do to take up the action.
Thank you so much. I think from my end, I have about 17,000 more questions around astrology and the RuPaul industrial complex, but I want to offer some space for the two of you to maybe share some thoughts about each other, some love, some support. I feel like spaces, especially around whenever I meet people who are from the community and are doing this kind of heavy activism, it's as much a space of love as much as it is about resistance and about witnessing and about overthrowing the capitalist patriarchy. So I just wanted to open that space up while we still have some time. Can you unmute Storm Miguel, please, Delia?
Thank you. Well, I just am just getting to meet you, Professor Pupchandani, and I'm very excited about your work. And one of the ways I feel like an expression of love is listening. And so, I'm very interested in hearing you talk about one of your favorite performances that you performance art pieces you did, and just talk about it. What was great about it, or what makes you so happy about it? What brings you joy thinking about it?
Um, well, so if you want to see me perform, I'm performing live tonight. That's why that camera in the background. At the University of Southern California, they have a performance art festival called Live Artists Live. So you can Google it and if you'd like. But a performance I'm doing tonight, and it's I've been doing this for a long time, but it's a performance of a whole new world from Aladdin. And it's, when I've been at bars, people are like, oh, I've always wanted my own Aladdin. And so I decided to give it to the people. And in that lip sync number, it's Aladdin fisting Jasmine, and showing her a whole new world, unbelievable sights and indescribable feelings. She can never go back. So but again, taking that thing that represents us and tells us this is what you're supposed to look like, and that's something that people place on me as, right, like, you're supposed to be my Aladdin fantasy, my Jasmine fantasy, and really saying, well, why don't we like find some pleasure in that, right, and refuse your gaze and have our own pleasure in that. Was and it's just a lot of fun because it traumatizes a lot of people who are like, I'll never see Aladdin again the same.
Good.
I'm like, good. I don't want you to see
work.
it the same. Right. I mean, it is a full colonial fantasy of what the Middle East, South Asia. We don't even know where it's placed, right? Somewhere between Turkey and China, right? We don't know. So yeah, it's a way of having my own pleasure in that. Yeah. I wanted to say I really loved and appreciated you talking about your turn to filmmaking and moving away from performance, because of what our bodies can do. And you had said your body has changed and what you can do has changed. And I just think that that's really important that we give. I think you named very beautifully what we give ourselves space to do, and what standards we hold ourselves to. And to think about the multiple things our bodies are and can be. I think we started with the question of identity, but I think really letting identity be many things and letting ourselves be many things. I think you've really opened that up for us. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. From the get-go, you did that. And I really, and you kept sort of coming back to it in different ways. And I really loved that. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you, and thank you
Thank
for
you so
sharing
much to
your
both of you.
subversion and all of the work you've done to truly like just blow it up the construct. I'm really excited to learn more about your work and to witness.
I'm so thrilled that that I got to have this incredible I'm just being all about me right now but I'm just
Yes.
really thrilled for myself that I got to have this incredible conversation with two people who I certainly hope will consider showing me the way of activism in the United States as I navigate my perilous journey as an immigrant there. And I wanted to thank you so much for joining the Decolonizing International Relations Conference. Unfortunately, you can run, you can hide, but you can't escape our love. So we will be plaguing you for future events, to quote Enrique. And I do want to announce that we are probably very soon going to be hosting a screening of Storm Miguel's movie that's still being bureaucratically processed through the Fletcher ecosystem. And I will keep everyone posted on that. And Professor Kupchandani, if you could share details about your performance, I will be sure to circulate it in our networks if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Just want to shout out Storm Miguel's partner as well, who is also a fierce activist and has made movies, and they work together. And I just find that incredibly powerful as well as wholesome at the same time. So I did want to tip my hat to that. Thank you so much for joining us. To all of you in the panel, I apologize on behalf of the conference team for what happened. I trust that our resilience and our love overcomes these instances of hate and phobia that still continue. And I wish everybody the best. I am available to talk on this link for some time if anyone would like to stay and chat. But otherwise, please join us tomorrow. We have some very exciting panels tomorrow as well on elections, Native peoples, meta reflections, alternate forms of resistance. There's just a lot going on tomorrow. So we hope to see you. Thank you so much, Tom Miguel and Professor Kupchandani. And thank you for
Thank
joining
you
Thank
us.
you so
having
much.
us. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Okay. I'm going to log off, Padmini. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Stormy Gal.
Bye. It's wonderful to meet you. I would love to stay connected.
Yeah. Send you an email.
All right. All right. Thank you, Padmini.
Thank you, Tom
Let's stay in
Miguel.
touch, okay?
Definitely. We hope to see you
Okay.
back.
Take care of yourself. I hope you get good sleep.
I hope so too. It's 3 a.m.
Yeah. All right. Well, sweet dreams. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Delia, throw everyone out who's not in the conference team. Sorry to all you nice people who are nice, but I don't have energy to deal with anybody who's not in the conference team right now. Thank you. Except you, Kendra, because I love you. Sorry, my best friend is on this call.
I'm removing her. Sorry.
All right, I'm gonna hop off and join the meeting with Brad.
Yeah, I'm joining that as well. I
All
don't
right,
think
cool.
there's anybody. See you guys. Katie, are you doing okay? Delia, Amaya, Mary?
Much better now.
Okay, now.
Their talk was exactly, I think, what we all needed. So,
Yeah, right.
yeah, feel much better now.
See you on the Brad call, guys.
All right, bye.
See ya.